My name is Elena Voss, and I was 32 the evening my father stood up in front of 200 people under those soft, golden string lights in our family garden, raised a glass of champagne, and handed my brother Marcus a check for $1.2 million. The whole backyard fell into applause as he grinned and talked about disrupting the supply chain and building an empire. Then my father turned to me with that calm, practiced smile he'd used on me for years and said the words that still echo in my chest. "Elena, go build your own life." He said it gently, almost kindly, like he was giving me wise fatherly advice instead of closing a door I had been quietly knocking on for 3 decades. The guests clapped again, softer this time, as if it was the most natural thing in the world for a father to hand one child a fortune and tell the other to figure it out alone. I smiled back the way I always did, polite, composed, unbreakable on the outside, but inside something deep and quiet clicked into place. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family choices and the quiet ones keep the cleanest receipts. If you've ever been the reliable daughter who got told to earn your place while your sibling got handed the keys to the kingdom, then pull up a chair. This story is for you. Type the word "seen" in the comments right now if you already feel where this is going. I read every single one. Let me paint that night for you. It was late summer in Hillsborough, just outside Portland. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass, barbecue smoke, and my mother's rose garden. Marcus was laughing loud, arms slung around Dad's shoulder, wearing a new watch that probably cost more than my car. My father, Richard Voss, looked at him with pure pride, the kind of look he had never once given me. My mother sipped her wine and nodded approvingly. My aunts kept touching my arm, telling me how proud they were of my little brother. And at the far end of the long table, my grandfather Harlan Voss sat quietly, 83 years old, hands folded over the handle of his cane, watching everything. He didn't clap when Marcus took the check. He didn't smile. He just looked straight at me across the garden, and in that moment I felt seen in a way I hadn't been in years. I didn't understand it yet, but I would remember that look for the rest of my life. Here's the part most people don't know. I wasn't some stranger in my own family. For over 10 years, I had been the one keeping Voss Properties, our family construction and property management company, running smoothly. I started doing the books at 21 when our old accountant retired. By 27, I had my CPA license and was handling payroll, compliance, vendor contracts, and tax strategy for all 8 of our commercial buildings. I caught mistakes that would have cost us hundreds of thousands. I negotiated better terms. I made sure the roof stayed on and the employees got paid on time. But I was the daughter, useful, reliable, invisible when it came to celebration. That night, after the party ended and the last guests left, I drove back to my small, 1-bedroom apartment across town. No mansion, no trust fund. Just me, a pot of strong coffee, and a fresh notebook I bought on the way home. I sat at my kitchen table under the warm lamplight and wrote one single word at the top of the first page. Begin. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there with the weight of that moment and made a decision. If my father wanted me to build my own life, then that's exactly what I would do, not out of anger. Not to prove him wrong, but because for the first time I finally understood that waiting to be chosen was never going to work. If you've ever had to sit through a family celebration where you felt like the extra guest instead of the daughter, you know how heavy that silence feels on the drive home. But sometimes that silence becomes the beginning of something real. Drop the word "begin" in the comments if you've ever had your own version of that night. This is only the beginning of the story. What I built in the next 12 months, what my grandfather did in the shadows where no one was watching, and what happened when that lawyer slid an envelope across the table, well, that's what turned my father's world upside down. Stay with me. The quiet parts are where the real power grows. That single word, begin, stayed with me long after the coffee went cold. But before I could truly start, I needed to look back at everything that had brought me to that kitchen table. Because the truth is, my father's announcement that night wasn't the first time I felt invisible in my own family. It was just the loudest. Mm. I grew up in the shadow of Marcus, the golden son, 2 years younger than me, but somehow always 10 steps ahead in my parents' eyes. He was the one with the big personality, the easy laugh, the endless ideas that sounded brilliant at dinner tables. I was the quiet one who actually made things work. At 21, when our longtime accountant retired and my father was panicking about taxes, I stepped in. No one asked me to, I just saw the mess and started organizing it. By 23, I was handling the full books for Voss Properties. Payroll every 2 weeks, vendor negotiations, lease agreements, tax filings, all of it. I caught a supplier who had been double billing us for over a year, saving the company nearly $60,000. My father patted me on the shoulder and said, "Good job, Elena." Then he took Marcus on a week-long fishing trip to celebrate a new development deal. I stayed behind to finish the quarterly reports. That became the pattern of my life. I was useful, I was dependable, but I was never the one they celebrated. My mother would say things like, "Marcus carries the Voss spirit, you keep the lights on." She meant it as a compliment. I heard it as a life sentence. I passed my CPA exams on the first try at 27 and started taking on a few outside clients while still running the family books for free. Nobody in the family ever asked what I actually did at my small accounting firm 2 towns over. They knew the title, but they never asked about the late nights, the complicated audits, or the small businesses I helped keep alive. Marcus, meanwhile, was always finding himself new business ideas, new cars, new adventures that somehow always needed family money behind them. I never complained. That was my mistake, I think. I believed if I just kept showing up, kept proving my worth through perfect numbers and quiet reliability, eventually they would see me. That night in the garden, when my father handed Marcus $1.2 million like it was nothing, I finally understood something important. They weren't going to see me, not unless I made them. The days after the party were strangely calm on the surface. I went to work, I smiled at family texts praising Marcus's big launch, and I started building Voss Legacy Partners in the quiet hours. It wasn't a flashy hedge fund or tech startup. It was something more honest, a financial consulting practice for small business owners who were drowning in bad books and bad advice. People like me, in a way, people who worked hard but didn't have anyone keeping the numbers clean for them. My first real client outside the family was Carla Ruiz. She owned a little bakery called Sweet Haven on the edge of town. When I met her, she was sitting in her back office, surrounded by shoeboxes of receipts, eyes red from crying. The bank was threatening to pull her line of credit, and she had no idea how much she was actually losing every month. I spent 4 full nights after my day job going through every transaction. I restructured her debt, renegotiated with suppliers, and set up a simple system she could actually manage. When I handed her the new financial summary and showed her she could turn a profit within 3 months, she hugged me so tight I could smell vanilla and flour on her apron. For the first time in years, I felt like my work mattered beyond keeping my father's empire afloat. But building something of my own while still carrying the weight of the family business took everything I had. I was at the office by 7, seeing my own clients until 9 or 10 at night, then reviewing Voss Properties reports on weekends. I had no social life to speak of. My apartment stayed quiet, except for the sound of my keyboard and the occasional rain against the window. There were moments I doubted myself. Late at night, I would wonder if my father was right. Maybe I should just keep doing what I was told. But then I would remember that garden party, the way the applause for Marcus felt like a door shutting on me, and I would open my notebook again and write the next step. If you've ever been the one who quietly holds everything together while someone else gets the glory, you know how exhausting that role becomes. You start to wonder if being reliable is the same as being loved. It's not, but that realization, painful as it is, can become the fuel for something better. Type the word invisible in the comments if you've ever felt like the background character in your own family story. I see you. By the end of that first month, Voss Legacy Partners had its first 3 clients. The name was filed legally. The website was simple but professional. And for the first time, I wasn't just keeping someone else's books clean, I was building something that belonged to me. Little did I know, my grandfather Harlan had been watching more closely than I realized, and the quiet conversations we were about to have would change the entire game. The morning after I wrote that word, begin, I drove out to the old yard where my grandfather had started everything. Voss Properties began in 1968 with one beat-up flatbed truck and a bad back. Harlan Voss turned it into a respected construction and property management company that put roofs over half the homes in our county. He was 83 now, moving slower, but his eyes still carried the same sharp focus that built our family name. He was already in the small office when I pulled up, the chipped green mug, the one he'd carried since before I was born, sitting on the counter like an old friend. Without saying much, he poured me a cup of coffee, black and strong the way I liked it, and slid it across the worn wooden desk. I told him everything. The garden party, the check for $1.2 million, my father's calm words telling me to go build my own life. I expected comfort, maybe even a quiet defense of me. Instead, Harlan looked at me over the rim of his mug and asked one simple question. "So what are you going to build, Elena?" That question landed differently than anything my parents had ever said. It wasn't pity, it wasn't doubt, it was a challenge wrapped in belief. I told him about the half-formed idea that had kept me up the night before, helping small business owners the way I had helped our family for years. Clean books, honest numbers, real plans instead of dreams, no handouts, just clear paths forward. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly as I spoke. When I finished, the rain had started tapping lightly on the tin roof, a sound I would come to love during the year ahead. Harlan was quiet for a long moment, then he said something I would carry like a stone in my pocket. "I'm not betting on the loud one anymore. I'm betting on the one who shows up." Those words stayed with me as I left the yard that day. The next week, I officially registered Voss Legacy Partners. It wasn't glamorous. I worked from home at first, using the dining table as my desk. My first real client outside the family was Carla Ruiz and her bakery, Sweet Haven. When she called me, she sounded exhausted, like someone who had been carrying the weight of her dream alone for too long. I spent 4 evenings after my regular job sitting in her flour-dusted back office. We went through every receipt, every confusing spreadsheet entry. I showed her where money was leaking, unnecessary supplier markups, missed tax deductions, poor cash flow timing. Together, we renegotiated contracts, set up a simple system she could actually follow, and secured a small line of credit from a local credit union that still believed in people like her. When Carla saw the new numbers and realized she could actually pay herself a modest salary for the first time in 2 years, she cried right there in the office. She hugged me tight and whispered, "I thought I was going to lose everything." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just work. This was proof that what I knew how to do actually mattered. Word started to spread quietly in the small business community. Another client came, a family-owned auto repair shop run by a man named Miguel who had been drowning in vendor debt. Then a local florist who needed help with seasonal cash flow. Each one started the same way, embarrassed, hesitant, expecting to be talked down to. Each one left with a clear plan and a signed agreement that protected both of us. Meanwhile, I kept my day job running the books for Voss Properties. I still showed up to family dinners and smiled when they talked about Marcus's big office with the exposed brick walls and fancy logo. But something had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. If you've ever taken that first scary step toward building something of your own, while everyone around you celebrated someone else, you know how terrifying and freeing it feels at the same time. It's lonely work, but it's honest work. Type the word first step in the comments if you're taking your own quiet steps right now. I'm rooting for you. By the end of that first month, Voss Legacy Partners had its foundation. It was small, but it was real, and my grandfather had been watching closer than I realized. Those coffee conversations with him became my anchor, quiet moments where he asked deep questions about risk, about contracts, about how I protected both my clients and myself. Little did I know, he wasn't just offering advice. He was preparing something much bigger, something that would one day change everything in a lawyer's office I hadn't even stepped foot in yet. Those early months blurred together in a rhythm of early mornings and late nights. I kept my full-time role managing the books for Voss Properties during the day, then poured everything I had left into Voss Legacy Partners after the sun went down. There were no fancy investors, no launch parties, no glowing press mentions, just me, my laptop, strong coffee, and one client at a time. By the 6-month mark, I had 11 steady clients. Each one had come through quiet word of mouth in the small business circles around Hillsborough and Portland. A contractor who needed help untangling job costing, a coffee roaster fighting supplier price hikes, a boutique owner whose inventory system was bleeding money. I treated every single one like it was the most important business in the world. I cleaned their books, built simple but powerful financial systems, renegotiated contracts, and helped them see their numbers clearly for the first time. The work was exhausting but deeply satisfying. I remember sitting in my apartment one rainy Tuesday night, surrounded by color-coded spreadsheets, realizing I hadn't had a real day off in months. My social life had completely disappeared. Friends stopped inviting me out because I was always busy with numbers. But in the quiet of those late hours, I felt something I had never experienced in my father's company: ownership. These wins belonged to me. Meanwhile, Marcus was living a very different story. With his $1.2 million, he had leased a sleek downtown office with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. He hired friends to handle branding and social media strategy. There were launch parties with craft cocktails and photographers. My parents attended every one, my mother posting photos with captions like, "So proud of my visionary son." My father stood in the background with that same proud look he'd worn at the garden party. I went to one of those events, mostly to avoid making it obvious I was pulling away. I stood near the back, listening as Marcus talked about disrupting the industry. At one point, a potential investor wandered over to me, thinking I was staff, and asked a genuine question about profit margins. I answered honestly, the way I always did. We ended up talking for almost 15 minutes about real numbers and sustainable growth. I saw Market Watts watching us from across the room, his smile tightening. He didn't like that someone was listening to his sister instead of him. Later that night, he cornered me near the exit. "You don't have to lurk at my party doing math, Elena," he said with that charming grin he used for the room. I looked at him calmly and replied, "I'm not lurking, Marcus, I'm learning." The smile stayed on his face for the guests, but his eyes told a different story. If you've ever watched your family pour everything into the loud one while you quietly built something real in the shadows, you know exactly how that moment feels. It stings, but it also steals you. Type the word shadows in the comments if you're currently building in silence while others get the spotlight. You're not alone. The whispers started around month 7. Family group chats and Sunday dinners carried the same narrative. Elena was bitter. Elena was jealous of her brother's success. She started that little side thing just to compete. My mother called me one afternoon, not to ask how my work was going, but to gently suggest I not make things awkward at the next gathering. "We don't want to embarrass the family," she said softly. I didn't argue. Fighting would only prove their story right. Instead, I kept showing up for my clients. When one of my aunts needed emergency help with her gift shop's books, I fixed it without mentioning the things she had said about me. She did the math herself. Next family dinner, she sat next to me. My grandfather continued to be my quiet anchor. I visited him often at the old yard office, bringing folders and updates. He asked deeper questions now: how I structured deals, who carried the risk, what happened if a client's business struggled. One rainy evening, he asked me to write the entire operating model of Voss Legacy Partner on a single clean page. I did it carefully, thinking he was just being a proud grandfather. I was too tired and too focused to realize he was measuring something much larger. By the end of that first year of building, Voss Legacy Partners wasn't flashy, but it was solid. Money was flowing in the right direction, toward real people trying to keep their dreams alive. Marcus's big venture, on the other hand, was starting to show cracks. Expensive mistakes were adding up, but I kept my focus on my own path. I had learned the hard way that comparing lanes only slows you down. The real test was still coming, and my grandfather was quietly preparing for it in ways none of us could see. The success of Voss Legacy Partners didn't go unnoticed for long. By the time I had 14 clients, the name Voss was starting to mean something different in our local business. Community, not just the big construction company, but the daughter who actually answered her phone and delivered results. That shift made my father uncomfortable. One Sunday afternoon, he summoned me to the family house. I found him in his study, the door already half closed, the way he did when he wanted to make a point. He didn't waste time on small talk. "I hear you're using the Voss name for your little side operation," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "That name belongs to the family business. To me, you need to stop." He framed it as protecting the brand, protecting the legacy, but we both knew what it really was, a test. He wanted to see if I would still fold, still trade my own progress for his approval the way I had for years. I stood there for a moment, remembering every late night I had spent fixing the family books for free while Marcus chased new ideas. I remembered the garden party and that check for $1.2 million. "You told me to go build my own life," I said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm doing, and I filed the LLC months ago. The name is legally mine now." His jaw tightened. He told me I'd regret being difficult, that family came first. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reminded him that I had followed his instruction to the letter. Then I left before either of us said something we couldn't take back. Driving home that evening, I realized the name had become the whole fight, and I wasn't giving it up. Meanwhile, the cracks in Marcus's empire were widening. The expensive office, the constant networking events, the team of friends who spent more than they earned, it was all catching up. One Thursday evening, he called me. For the first time in our lives, he needed something from me. His voice tried to sound casual, like he was doing me a favor by letting me in. "Can you take a look at my books, Elena, just as a sister?" I went. I owed myself the chance to see it clearly. The numbers were worse than the rumors. Of the $1.2 million, less than $400,000 remained, and it was draining fast. There was no real revenue, just a beautiful stage with nothing behind the curtains. I showed him the truth plainly, where the money had gone and what drastic cuts could still save. Then came the real reason he called. He wanted Voss Legacy Partners to invest in his company to bridge him until his next big investor came through. I looked at my brother, the one who had received everything as a head start, and I said no, not cruelly but clearly. "I don't pour clean money into stories, Marcus. I invest in systems that work." He didn't tell our parents how bad things were. I didn't expose him either. Some secrets aren't mine to tell. But the tension at family dinners grew thicker. The whispers continued that I was jealous, competitive, ungrateful. My mother would call with gentle reminders not to make things awkward. My aunts repeated Marcus's version of events. I stayed quiet and kept working. My actions were the only argument I trusted. If you've ever been painted as the difficult one simply for refusing to disappear while someone else wasted opportunities, you know how isolating that feels. But there's strength in refusing to play their game. Type the word boundaries in the comments if you've ever had to draw a line with family. It's never easy, but it's necessary. Through all of this, my grandfather remained my steady light. Our evening conversations at the yard grew deeper. He wanted to know every detail of how I protected my clients, how I balanced risk, and how I kept my own books cleaner than anyone else's. One stormy night, with rain hammering the tin roof, he asked for that one-page summary of Voss Legacy Partners again. I updated it and handed it to him without question. I thought he was just proud. I had no idea he was building something permanent. The real storm was still coming, but in that season of tension and quiet growth, I was learning the difference between being given a name and earning one. Through all the family tension and late-night client work, my grandfather Harlan became my one steady place. I started visiting the old yard office more often, even when I didn't have urgent family business to discuss. There was something comforting about the familiar smell of cut pine, machine oil, and that constant soft ticking of rain on the tin roof. His chipped green mug always sat in the same spot on the counter, like a quiet witness to decades of real work. Those evenings we would sit across from each other with coffee steaming between us. At first, our talks were simple updates, but gradually his questions went deeper. He wanted to know exactly how I structured every deal at Voss Legacy Partners. How did I decide which clients to take on? What happened to the risk if a business folded? Who held the paper and who carried the real weight? He asked the way a man asks when he's measuring something important, not out of casual curiosity, but with purpose. One particularly stormy night, the rain was coming down hard, drumming steadily on the roof like it was keeping time with my thoughts. I had brought him an updated one-page summary of how Voss Legacy Partners operated, clean, simple, with every term laid out plainly the way he had taught me years ago. He read it slowly, nodding as his finger traced each line. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and looked at me with those sharp eyes that hadn't faded with age. "You're not just helping people, Elena," he said quietly. "You're building something that lasts. That's rarer than you think." I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. For so long I had been doing this work alone in the quiet hours. Having someone, especially him, truly see the structure behind it meant more than I could say. He didn't offer empty praise. He asked hard questions, challenged my assumptions, and made me explain every decision like I was presenting to a boardroom. Those conversations sharpened me. A few weeks later, on a bright but cold afternoon, we walked the old lumber yard together. He named different types of wood the way other men name old friends. At the end of the walk, he led me back into the office and pressed something into my hand. It was a key, the key to this very office. "When the rain comes through that roof," he said, closing my fingers around it, "somebody who keeps good books should be the one to decide how to fix it." I laughed softly at first, thinking he was talking about literal repairs, but the way he looked at me told me it was more. He wasn't just talking about the building. He was talking about the entire legacy. I slipped the key onto my ring next to my apartment and car keys. It felt ordinary among the others, but it carried a weight I couldn't yet name. If you've ever had one person in your life who truly saw your quiet effort when the rest of the world didn't, you know how precious those moments are. They become the fuel that keeps you going when everything else feels heavy. Type the word anchor in the comments if you've had a grandparent or mentor who believed in you before the world did. I'm so grateful I had mine. I drove home that evening feeling lighter than I had in months. The key was cool in my pocket, and for the first time I allowed myself to believe that maybe I wasn't building alone after all. My grandfather was preparing something. I could feel it in the way he watched me, in the careful questions, in the single page he kept in his old desk drawer. But I didn't push him. I let him keep his secrets the way old men sometimes do. That decision, more than anything, would stay with me after he was gone. The quiet season of building was coming to an end. The real test was approaching faster than any of us expected. The call came on a quiet Saturday night, the kind where the rain had just stopped and the air felt clean and heavy at the same time. My mother's voice was small on the other end of the line. "Grandpa's gone, Elena. He passed in his sleep." I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment after she hung up, the phone still warm in my hand. There was no dramatic breaking, just a deep, quiet ache that settled somewhere behind my ribs. Harlan Voss had been my anchor through the entire year of building in silence. Now the anchor was gone, and I had to learn how to steady the ship without him. I drove to the family house that same night. The lights were on, but the energy felt hollow. My father was already talking about arrangements in that efficient way of his, like turning grief into a checklist. My mother sat on the couch with red eyes, clutching a tissue. Marcus stood by the window, looking uncomfortable as if death had interrupted his momentum. I did what I always did. I carried things. I made the calls to the funeral home, wrote the obituary that tried to capture even a fraction of who my grandfather really was. chose the hymns he used to hum while working on the old truck, and made sure there was coffee and food for the people who would come pay their respects. The service was beautiful in its simplicity. Half the town showed up because Harlan had put roofs over their heads and jobs in their pockets for decades. I stood at the front shaking hands, accepting casseroles, and holding my mother when she needed it. People kept telling me how strong I was for not crying in public. They didn't understand that my grief didn't work on schedule. It came later, alone, in the places where he had been. The night after the burial, I used the key he had given me. I let myself into the old yard office. The smell of sawdust and pine hit me first. His chipped green mug sat exactly where it always had. I picked it up, washed it gently, dried it, and placed it back in its spot. Then I sat in his chair in the dark and let the tears come, quiet, steady, the kind that had been waiting for months. 1 year of building, 1 year of proving I could do it, and the one person who had truly believed in me from the start was no longer here to see the rest. If you've ever lost the one person who saw the real you when everyone else looked past, you know how sacred and painful that private grief feels. It's not for the crowd, it's just yours. Type the word grief in the comments if you've carried something like this alone. You're stronger than you know. In the days that followed, I noticed my father watching me differently. Even during the receiving line, I caught him quietly asking the family attorney when the will would be read and how soon everything could be settled. His own father had only been in the ground a few days, and he was already calculating. That hunger in his eyes stayed with me. I threw myself back into work. Voss Legacy Partners kept growing. My clients needed me. The family business still needed its books managed. But underneath it all, I felt the weight of waiting. I knew a reading was coming. I knew my father expected the controlling interest in Voss properties to pass to him cleanly, the way he had planned and borrowed against. I expected very little for myself, maybe a keepsake, maybe nothing at all. I had already built what I needed to build. What I didn't know was that my grandfather had spent his last clear months preparing a different ending. One written in careful language, signed with a steady hand, and witnessed by people who mattered. The envelope was already waiting in a lawyer's office, ready to slide across a table and change everything. The quiet before the storm felt heavier than any rain on that tin roof. The reading was scheduled for a gray Tuesday morning 2 weeks after the funeral. I drove across town under a low, wet sky that promised rain by noon. I wore the same gray suit I used for important client meetings, professional, calm armor I could trust. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything. I was only going to honor the man who had believed in me when no one else did. But as I walked into Ms. Langford's law office, I could feel the weight of the year pressing against my chest. The conference room was smaller than I imagined, warm wood tones and soft lighting that did nothing to ease the tension. My father took the head of the table without being invited, the way he always claimed space. My mother sat to his right, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Marcus slouched in the chair to his left. Scrolling his phone like this was just another inconvenience in his day. A few aunts and a great-uncle filled the remaining seats, there to witness, there to whisper later. I chose a seat near the end by the window, where I could watch the sky and keep my breathing steady. Ms. Langford entered carrying a thick leather folder. She was a composed woman in her late 50s with kind but sharp eyes, the kind of lawyer who had seen every version of family greed and grief. She offered her condolences in a voice that felt genuine, then opened the folder and began. Walter Harlan Voss did not leave a simple will, she explained. Years ago, with my assistance, he placed the bulk of his assets into a revocable living trust. Upon his passing, that trust became irrevocable. Most of the estate will pass according to its specific terms outside of probate, privately and exactly as he arranged. My father's brow furrowed. This was not the script he had prepared for. He had expected a straightforward will he could anticipate and control. A trust was a locked door he hadn't known existed. "What does that mean for the business?" he asked, his voice carrying the first edge of impatience. Ms. Langford remained perfectly calm. "It means we follow Mr. Voss's instructions precisely." Outside the window, the first drops of rain began to tap against the glass. The sound reminded me of the tin roof at the old yard, and for a moment I felt my grandfather in the room with us. She started with the smaller bequests, reading them carefully and without hurry. Tools from the yard went to 2 longtime employees by name, a college fund for the youngest grandchildren, a generous clean sum for my mother with no strings attached, enough to make her eyes fill with quiet tears. Marcus received the old flatbed truck my grandfather had started the business with in 1968, along with $10,000 and a note about the value of honest work. I watched my brother's face tighten as the reality settled in. He had walked into this room expecting the trust to refill his failing accounts. Instead, he received a 30-year-old truck and a reminder of where it all began. My father sat very still, waiting for the only line that mattered to him, the controlling interest in Voss Properties, the foundation his loans and expansion plans rested upon, the inheritance he had already spent in his mind. Miss Langford paused, letting the room settle. Then she continued in that same measured tone. "Before we address the primary holdings," she said, "I need to read the specific condition Mr. Voss attached to the transfer of the controlling interest." The air in the room grew thick. Every head turned toward her. The rain outside fell steadier now, matching the rhythm of my own heartbeat. If you've ever sat in a room where you could feel the entire direction of your life about to shift, you know how heavy that silence feels. I kept my hands folded on the table and breathed slowly, the way my grandfather had taught me when facing hard numbers. Whatever came next, I had already built something real. No piece of paper could take that away. But I was wrong about one thing. The paper waiting in that folder was about to give me something I had never dared to fully claim. Ms. Langford let the silence settle for a moment before she continued. Her voice remained steady and professional, but I could hear the weight behind every word. "The controlling interest in Voss Properties and the majority of the business holdings," she read, "shall pass to the heir who, during Mr. Voss's lifetime, built and documented a sustainable business or investment fund of their own. This must include real capital at risk, for agreements, and witness documentation." The room went completely still. You could hear the rain hitting the window like it was keeping score. Every head turned slowly, one by one, until all eyes were on me. My father's hands flattened hard against the polished table. My mother turned and looked at me with something between shock and dawning realization. Marcus stopped scrolling his phone entirely. Miss Langford reached into the leather folder and drew out a plain white envelope. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's handwriting, slightly unsteady from his later days, but unmistakably his. She slid it gently down the long table toward me. It traveled past my father, past my mother, past Marcus, and every eye in the room followed its path like it was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. "Mr. Voss asked that you open this here, Elena," Ms. Langford said quietly, in front of everyone. My father found his voice first. "This is absurd," he said, the words sharp and rising. "She kept his books once or twice. That doesn't make her the heir to everything. He was old, he was confused. She must have manipulated him." His voice climbed quickly. The calm, controlled businessman I had known my whole life began to unravel right there in front of us. He stood up, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I will contest this. I'll take it to every court in the state if I have to. This is not how things work in this family." Ms. Langford raised one hand calmly, not unkindly, but with the quiet authority of someone who had sat through many such storms. "Mr. Voss was very specific, and the trust was established and reviewed years ago while he was fully competent. Please, let's allow Elena to open the envelope as he requested." The room held its breath. I picked up the envelope and felt the year press through the paper. Every late night, every client saved, every quiet conversation with my grandfather, every time I chose to build instead of fight. My hands were steady as I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside were 2 things, a formal page from the trust documentation and a handwritten letter. I read the official page first the way my grandfather had taught me, terms before feelings. It confirmed everything. Under the trust, the controlling interest passed to me, Elena Voss, because I had built Voss Legacy Partners with documented investment, real capital, and witnessed agreements. The proof named specifically was a one-page term sheet dated almost a year earlier, the $75,000 investment from Harlan into my fund, signed by him, me, and Carla Ruiz as witness. My father's face went pale, then flushed red with fury. This is manipulation. He was sick. She took advantage. He started shouting. The words came fast and loud, filling the small conference room and spilling into the hallway. Accusations of greed, of turning his father against him, of stealing what was rightfully his. An assistant cracked the door to check on the noise. My mother reached for his sleeve, but he shook her off. The man who had calmly told me to go build your own life in front of 200 people was now losing control in front of a handful of family members. I waited until the storm peaked and the room began to quiet from sheer exhaustion. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the original term sheet I had carried with me for months, the one with 3 signatures dated long before my grandfather's health had declined. I placed it on the table next to the letter and the trust document. This, I said calmly, my voice level like Ms. Langford's, is what building my own life looks like. Here is his hand, steady, clear, from last spring. Read it if you need to. Nobody moved to pick it up. They didn't have to. The truth was sitting there in black and white for everyone to see. If you've ever been in a room where someone who underestimated you their whole life finally saw the truth, you know how surreal that moment feels. Not triumphant, just clarifying. Type the word truth in the comments if you've ever watched someone realize too late what they had overlooked. My father was still standing, breathing hard, but the screaming had stopped. The foundation he had built his entire plan upon was crumbling in real time, and I was the one holding the clean books. I picked up the handwritten letter last. The paper felt thin but heavy with everything it carried. My grandfather's handwriting was there, a little shaky in places, but clear and deliberate. I read it slowly, letting each word settle. Elena. I'm sorry I'm not there to see your face when you read this. I watched a man hand everything to the loud one and give the steady one nothing but a sentence. That day in the garden, I decided it wouldn't be the end of our story. You didn't just keep the books, granddaughter. You kept the soul of this family alive when it was easiest to let it drift. The name Voss was always meant to be carried by the one who earned it. I just made it official. I'm not betting on the loud one, I bet on the one who showed up. You earned this long before anyone gave you a dime. Now go run it the way you know how, with clean books and a steady hand. Love, Grandpa Harlan. 2 quiet tears slipped down my cheeks. No more than that. I was still in a room full of people, still the one who carries things. But in that moment, something deep inside me finally settled. The year of doubt, the late nights, the whispers, the loneliness, it had all been seen, truly seen. I folded the letter carefully and looked up. My father was still standing, but the rage had shifted into something hollow and frightened. The man who had built his entire future on an assumption that was never promised was watching it disappear. I stood slowly, not to shout him down, but because someone needed to keep the room from falling apart. I've never won anything by being the loudest, and I wasn't going to start now in my grandfather's name. As successor trustee, I said, my voice calm and even, I will keep Voss Properties open. Every employee will stay on payroll. We will work with the bank honestly to restructure the loans that were built on expectations instead of reality. No one will be put on the street. That's not who Grandpa was, and it's not who I am. I turned to Marcus. I'm offering you a real position as operations manager. It comes with hours, targets, and accountability. No more gifts, only earned responsibility. If you want it, it's yours. My brother looked up at me, the keys to the old flatbed truck still in his hand. For once, he had nothing clever to say. He simply nodded. My mother sat very still, staring at the term sheet and the letter on the table. Finally, she spoke, almost to herself. She carries the name now. The same woman who once told me Marcus carried the name and I just had it. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken in my grandfather's handwriting. If you've ever had to stand in a room and choose grace instead of revenge when you finally had the power, you know how heavy and freeing that choice feels. I didn't want to crush them. I wanted to protect what my grandfather actually built. Type the word grace in the comments if you believe real strength shows up in how we treat people when we no longer have to prove anything. I turned back to Ms. Langford. Let's do this by the book, exactly as he wanted. She nodded with quiet respect. As the meeting ended, my father sat back down, quieter now, recalculating his entire life in silence. The loud anger had burned out, leaving only the ashes of assumptions. I gathered the letter and the term sheet, slid them back into the envelope, and walked out of the conference room into the hallway. The rain had eased outside. The pavement was wet and shining under a thin break in the clouds. I didn't go straight home. I drove out to the old yard instead. I let myself in with the key my grandfather had pressed into my hand on his last good day. His office smelled exactly as it always had, sawdust, pine, and decades of honest work. His green mug sat on the counter. I picked it up, turned it slowly in my hands, then set it back down exactly where it belonged. Some things you don't move, you just keep them steady. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected, and I was grateful for that. Drama had gotten us into this mess. Healing would come through steady daily choices instead. I took up the role of successor trustee the same way I had always worked, quietly and completely. Voss Properties stayed open. Payroll went out every Friday without fail. I sat down with the bank, laid every ledger bare, and restructured my father's risky loans into something honest, slower, and survivable. No one lost their job. The town didn't lose another business. I folded Voss Legacy Partners into the larger operation so the small shops and dreamers I had been helping could continue to find support. Marcus accepted the operations manager position. The first month was rough on his pride. He had to clock in, learn the inventory system, answer to schedules and targets he couldn't charm his way out of. But somewhere in the second month, I caught him staying late one evening, fixing a supply order without being asked. He was doing the work because not because anyone was watching. I let myself feel a small, careful hope for him. My mother never gave me the tearful movie-style apology. She simply started treating me differently, more careful with her words, more present. My father and I now speak in the language of business. It's not warm hugs or heartfelt confessions, but it's honest, and for our family that is its own kind of progress. One evening, a few months later, I drove out to the old yard again. The rain had just passed, leaving that clean Oregon smell in the air. I let myself in with the key that still felt heavy on my ring. The office was quiet. I picked up Grandpa Harlan's chipped green mug, held it for a long moment, then set it back exactly where it had lived for decades. Some things you don't move. You simply protect them. If you've ever had to rebuild a relationship with the people who once overlooked you, you know it doesn't always look like forgiveness scenes in movies. Sometimes it looks like clean books, steady payroll, and learning to speak a new language with the people who raised you. Type the word healing in the comments if you're doing that slow, honest work in your own family right now. Here's what that entire year taught me, the only lesson I want to leave with you. A name that is given to you can always be taken away, but a name you earn with your own 2 hands, late nights, clean numbers, and quiet integrity, that name is yours forever. No announcement in any garden, no check handed to someone else, and no angry voice in a lawyer's office can ever call it back. If your family ever told you to go build your own life, take it as the greatest dare you will ever receive. Don't build to prove them wrong. Build to prove to yourself who you really are when no one is clapping. Thank you for sitting with me through this whole story, for every late night listen, every comment, every quiet me too. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop the word earned in the comments if you're choosing to build instead of wait. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, where ordinary people keep showing up and impossible families learn what real strength looks like. This is Elena Voss signing off with clean books and a steady heart.